All right, thanks everybody again for joining us to this first part of this series on how to run for office. What we want to talk about first is should you run for office? So, Aaron and I are going to cover a couple different topics that are most relevant if you are thinking about running for office or whether you should run for office. And there's a couple different pieces here. And why don't we start kind of at maybe at the beginning, which is before you are thinking about taking a leadership position through running for office, because the ultimate goal, of course, is to be on the school board, on the town council, on your county board or state legislator. Before that point in time, it would be appropriate to think that you've been engaged and involved in the community that you're running for office in. I think one of the questions that I know Aaron and I hear a lot about from people that are thinking about running for office is what do you do in the time period before deciding to actually run? How do you get involved? How do you build a base? How do you network in your community? And how do you understand what the issues are in your community? One of the important things to keep in mind is that so many of us, especially in 2020, kind of come into situations with everything already figured out, so to speak. And if you're running for office, one of the things that you need to be able to do, not only on a constant basis, but before you decide to run, is check that and make sure that you aren't just sort of steamrolling your own pre existing beliefs forward. Make sure you understand what is going on in the community. And so, for example, for me, when I graduated college, I moved back home to South Orange and started to get involved. I joined our library board in South Orange. I started getting involved with our community emergency response team and eventually got my EMT certification and joined our rescue squad. Started going to all the town council meetings and started writing for our local newspaper. All of those different experiences kind of brought me in touch with people in the community. You know, for example, being out on calls as an EMT on the rescue squad and learning about some of the issues at the police department. It's just one of the many ways that I heard directly from people what was going on. I went to the meetings, I did all of the kind of homework. And as I got more and more into some of those activities, I felt more and more confident that some of the things that I thought might have been an issue were indeed an issue. Um, and probably the biggest one among those was there seemed to be a disconnect kind of between what the municipal government was doing and what people in town knew about what the municipal government was doing. And that seemed like a bridge that should be able to be brought together, especially in this day and age of technology. So I know, Aaron, we've talked about this a little bit before. You've heard from people that they sort of struggle with thinking through, you know, they're graduating college, they finished a job, they finished something, they want to move back somewhere or go somewhere, and they want to think about what does that runway look like to even be able to decide to run. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is a really important topic because I do see it as one of the biggest barriers to entry for people in our generation that are thinking about running for local office, right? Because you know our generation is inherently transient. We're moving around. We're leaving our where we grew up, and we're going to college, and then we may be moving to a city or moving somewhere else for a job. We may live there for a few years and then move somewhere else. And even in a large city, I'm in New York City. I live on the Upper East Side, so I'll use New York as an example. We have, you move 2 blocks even in Manhattan, and you're in a different city council district. You're in a different community board. So even if you're like, I can, plant roots in New York and get involved in the community there. You may move into an apartment when you're 27 and get a new job when you're 29 and want to move to a different apartment, and that poses challenges for you because you're moving across district lines, and the politics change and the landscape changes. So I think what you did in South Orange is I think an example of kind of the right way to do it. But not everybody has the time or the sort of the life flexibility to move back home to a suburban community or to plant roots in a suburban community. And I can definitely talk a little bit more later about what I see as some of the fundamental differences between running in a city and running in a suburb, because I've experienced campaigning in both, and I do find them to be very different. But I think running in a local community, either way, city or suburb, you need to know your stuff, right? And by stuff, it's a little bit of what you were getting at. You need to understand the mechanics of what the local government, what the municipal government does for its citizens. What are the needs of the constituents? What are the services that are being delivered? Who are the people in government that are delivering those services? What are their jobs? What are their functions? What are the various local boards that are citizen led, citizen driven, that are making decisions about the budgets of those different departments and those different services? And then what are some of the policies at play, and some of the that could potentially change the way that those services are delivered or funded, to make a difference in the community, and to make a difference and address certain issues that constituents have. So this is, I'm talking about this in a very general way. This changes from one community to another, and it's something that takes a little time to absorb. You typically can't just go online and read about it all, right? You need to get involved in a board. You need to join your planning board. You need to talk to people that work in the local government. You need to talk to people that are involved in the local political parties, and get a sense for how it's all working, what needs to be fixed, what some of the issues are, and develop that vocabulary to be able to talk about it in an informed way, and to generate some ideas that you can eventually run on. And I do think that that takes time, and I think that you can do it from afar. I mean, I got one example of one of my best friends who ran for um, town council in our hometown. She was living in the city, and serving on the local planning board for a time while she was living in the city. She was using her parents' address, and sort of moving back and forth between the town and the city until she eventually moved back home full time to run for town council. I think that there are ways to be creative about getting involved in a community from a distance while you explore whether or not running makes sense for you. But it is a challenge, and it does require some forethought and planning.
It does, and you've got to be open-minded about what you're going to be finding, right? Because part of the idea of those experiences is that you're going to be learning about what's happening in the community, and that's going to help you make the decision about whether running is really the right thing to do or not. What we don't need, I don't think what any of us need, are more people running for office to fulfill some part of their ego about wanting to be in power or wanting to be in front of people or winning an election. We need people who are prepared to do hard work. We need people who are prepared to kind of dig in and not do things because it looks good, but do things that are the right things to do.
Well,
Um,
I'm sorry. I'm going to stop
no,
you
go
there.
ahead.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I'm going to push back on that a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
bit, because I do think that there is a level of ego that is healthy, and that is in some ways necessary. Uh, this running for office is hard work. Running for office at the local level is hard work. Um, People are going to be very critical. People are going to be mean spirited and say stuff that hurts your feelings, as you well know. And I think that having a level of self confidence, and beyond self confidence, eagerness to put yourself out there and be exposed to that criticism and that feedback loop is necessary to you know keeping the fire lit, keeping the energy going. I think that governance and policy, um, that is in a separate lane. And of course, like, you have to be good at that. You have to understand. You have to have ideas and be creative. Um, but you don't get to do that until you run for office and you win. And then once you're in office, you have to be sort of campaigning around your ideas and your plans and your policies. So the campaign never stops, and the campaign is very hard. And so I do think a little bit of ego is healthy.
I would agree that there's a little bit that's healthy, but I want to draw a distinction between sort of confidence, earned confidence, and ego, because one of the things that we wanted to spend a minute on is sort of thinking about your values and thinking about leadership qualities. And, there are people who that gets away from them. They start out thinking that they've got some good ideas and et cetera. And it's very, very easy, even in the early stages of even thinking about running for office. If you're thinking about running and everybody that you talk to says this is the best idea I've ever heard, you should do it, you should be concerned that your network might not be giving you enough critical feedback, because there's always multiple sides to an issue. And Aaron, I mean, you're so right that you have to be at this level. And a lot of people, I mean, there are people, I've worked with campaigns and seen campaigns where people have started the campaign and then dropped out because they just weren't really prepared for how big of a challenge they were biting off. But I want to make sure that, at least from my perspective, if you're thinking about running and you're thinking about taking the responsibility on of managing a community or creating laws, that is coming with a healthy dose of reflection and self-criticism that don't let that confidence turn into this sort of limitless ego where everything you do is right and you can't do anything wrong. The confidence should be earned. You do your homework, you get involved in the right ways, and you work hard, and that confidence is appropriate. But for those who just want to jump in, and even if it's the best intentions, you want to solve all the problems tomorrow, it's just not going to happen that quickly. And really big change, I mean, we've seen throughout history, really big change doesn't happen overnight. And that's one of the things that's probably important to be in your mind somewhere at the beginning of this journey, is that you're making a commitment, for the long haul. That doesn't mean you have to stay in office forever. It doesn't even mean you have to run for reelection. But it does mean that the thing that you want to accomplish might take you months or years to do, and you might have to fight for it. You might have to sacrifice other things for it. And so
I
there is a
agree.
balancing act there that's
I,
probably hard to identify.
I agree. I think you should be looking at this as a 10-year project. You need to really do it right. And I know you had a very good run in less time. Um, but I think that most people should see it as a 10-year project, a couple years for this period of time of getting to know the community, getting involved, joining some local organizations. A couple of years of running for office, ideally, depending obviously on the community. If it's very small, if it's a very small office, it may be less time, and a good chunk of years to be in office and make change, because like you said, that's going to take time.
And I think your time is actually kind of right on the money. Even when I think back to my own experience, I mean, when I went to college, I knew I wanted to study government. I knew I wanted to understand how to make these systems work better. And I spent all 4 years on the student government in college. And I credit that my time in at Hampshire College. I credit that with so much. And part of it was actually learning how to govern on a super hyper local level, which, as you might find as you kind of get involved more in these things, the more local you get, sometimes the more intense and dramatic the whole ecosystem is.
Yeah.
And so, college campuses are very insular places. And I spent 4 years basically training for running for office. And so the 2 years afterwards, or year and a half, or year afterwards, that I was getting involved in South Orange was already being built on multiple years of getting involved in the local government in the town that I went to school in and the student government there. And basically, all of my studies were about this. And so it really does take a while if you want to do a good job. And coming into being a mayor, at 23 years old, it was overwhelming is an understatement, but I did actually feel like I could do it. But I couldn't have felt that way if I hadn't for years been practicing and learning and thinking and getting ready for that experience.
Yeah.
So we can't underestimate sort of the value of taking your time to some degree here. Now, I certainly, when I thought about running, a lot of the advice that I got from people was to wait. A lot of people tried to talk me out of running for office when I had the idea. People sometimes were supportive but concerned, or just generally didn't think it was the greatest idea. People in politics and outside of it, and there was a lot of advice, kind of like, well, you should, get a law degree or business degree and make some money and have a family, and then you can run for office. Now, for me, and probably for people that are watching this, it wasn't, running for office isn't a hobby. This was sort of a calling, a responsibility that I felt like I had to this community. There were problems that were happening on the local level and broader, and I wanted to get plugged in as soon as possible. And so it's tough. You don't want to wait for the sake of waiting, but certainly waiting one more election cycle to give you an extra couple years to really get engaged and build a network and learn what's going on in your community, that might be worth it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that you're doing yourself a disservice, and I've seen a lot of people um, spend a lot of time and effort on a campaign, and do well enough to feel like that fire is lit throughout, where they're going to be pushing themselves really hard, and then come short because they didn't spend the time building that network and laying down those roots, which I think are you know tremendously important to a successful local campaign.
Agreed. And so, probably some of the takeaways so far here is take the time to get involved in the community that you think you might want to get more involved in by running. Don't wait for the sake of waiting, but give yourself the time to get engaged and find some things that allow you to contribute direct value back to your community and allow you to learn about what's going on. If these are experiences where you're coming in and you're just sort of doing them to check a box, that might be a problem. But if you're doing them because you're genuinely curious about getting involved in that field, for me, getting involved in emergency medicine and sort of emergency management, I really wanted to learn more about how that all worked. The college I went to had a student-run EMT program where students were EMTs and they covered. I think they had two EMTs on 24 hours a day, and it was amazing that you had this kind of situation. You were in class and something would happen and there's an EMT. People were at parties and there were somebody around that was responsible. I just love the idea of people having some of this training and responsibility. When I went back home, I wanted to learn, well, how could you take that? How could you replicate that model on a college campus that provided this really incredible safety net, and replicate that in a town? And so the experience of getting involved in those things wasn't to check a box, but it was to actually learn about those different areas. And if you can find something that allows you to add value and allows you to learn and allows you to meet people in the community, that could be the right kind of thing to get involved in. Of course, there's a lot more detail that we could go into there, but hopefully that provides a little bit of helpful information in thinking about that kind of first pathway. And once you're going along that pathway, there's going to be a certain point where you're going to have to make sort of a decision about whether you're doing this or not. And that decision, I mean, tell me what you think about this, Aaron, but that decision shouldn't just be, motivated by your internal goals, but it should be motivated to some degree, if not primarily, by what your community that you're thinking about running in actually needs. And can you address, are you going to help facilitate some solution to that need?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a reason to run, like I think the person who runs because, I'm just going to use the classic example of potholes, right? But the person who runs on the platform of, the potholes in our community are terrible and they're causing accidents and damaging people's cars and everybody's upset about it. And I am the pothole candidate. I'm going to fix the potholes. I have a plan to fix the potholes, is going to do better than the candidate who, maybe has that big ego and says, I'm great. I'm a great leader and I'm going to be great for this community.
Everybody
And
tells me I'm great.
everyone tells me I'm great. Everyone likes me, and I'm going to have some great ideas. So you should vote for me. Or no, but obviously, to a lesser degree, just like, somebody who's running on a very kind of general platform of, you know, improvements and, doing what's best for the community. I don't know, but you need to have specific reasons you're running. That's not only, is that better from an authenticity standpoint, it's better from a um, communication standpoint, it's better from a being able to sell your campaign standpoint.
And that's sort of a great segue to talking a little bit about some of the values that might be important here, because authenticity is such an important value, something certainly that has always been important to me, but which over the years it's only compounded, how often it doesn't exist and how much more often it needs to exist. And so there's a difference between, kind of sitting in a room and saying, well, I want to run for office because I have this kind of stepping stone political career in mind, and then filling in everything kind of behind that, and not being as interested in those solutions, versus if you've identified potholes as a solution and you actually have a novel solution, you've got a different way to fund them. You're an engineer and you have experience such that you think that the way the municipality is filling the potholes could be better. There are so many different ways to even approach that really common problem in local government. If you have a novel solution there and that becomes part of your campaign platform because you've heard people complain about it and it's an area that you feel confident you can add value in, that's so much more real than, and this doesn't often happen at the local level, but let's say, polling on a bunch of issues and just picking the ones that are the best polling issues and saying, well, I'm going to be on those issues because
Right.
those are the ones that everybody else is talking about. If you're not bringing yourself to the table to some degree, then there might be a mismatch because maybe you're not the right person for that moment, or maybe your ideas and the community's needs aren't totally aligned.
Yeah, and I think this is where, like, being attuned to the needs of the community and having, a cohort of local stakeholders
Mm-hmm.
that you've developed strong relationships, that you trust, that like you, that are invested in you as a leader in the community, and leaning on them to help you generate that platform is really important. And I know that you had some people, in the community that were more senior that kind of helped you along and that you could lean on for advice and for ideas. And I would strongly encourage people who are getting more involved in a community and thinking about maybe running to have that handful of folks that have been at it for longer than you, to kind of give you a sense of what those issues are if you don't have them yourself.
I mean, there's no interaction with someone where if you're really trying to do this and you're trying to do a thorough, good job, there's no interaction. There's no circumstance really where you won't learn something by doing it. And so people that you don't agree with, people that you like, people that you don't like, all of those people are great sources of information, and will help you build a more rounded idea of what's actually happening. And, it's important to make sure that, you don't use kind of confirmation bias to seek out all of the issues that you already think are issues. Try to find the arguments against you, try to find the arguments for the other people that might be running, try to figure out why what you're proposing doesn't make sense, and really think through all of that so that when you come out and you say, here are the things I want to do, you can be confident in those things. And it makes a big difference, when you're young, especially, and you're up there, or if you belong to any socioeconomic or demographic group that people aren't expecting to see run for office, which is most of them, that there are going to be people who aren't going to, you're not going to come to the table with any automatic credibility. If you don't look like what people are expecting, they're going to press you a lot harder than they would normally. The number of times when I knocked on doors where people said things like, well, you're so young, what could you possibly know about doing anything? And, I would often ask, well, the people that are there, how old are they? And well, how good of a job are they doing? And why are you giving them a break? Why are you being so critical of me without being that same level of critical with them? If you want to ask those questions and really push people to explaining, what they're going to do, you should be pushing the people that have been there for a while and haven't accomplished the things that you think need to be done. But just be prepared that that if you're an unexpected candidate, you're going to get that pushback. And the more you have at your back, the more research you've done, the more people you've thought about it from different groups, the more confident you can go into those conversations. And that confidence is going to come across when you're knocking on doors, when you're in a debate, when you're making phone calls. That confidence is going to be really important, but it should be earned confidence, like we've talked about, not just that you think you're the best. So that authenticity is really key, making sure that you've got these values in place and you've got these goals, and then making sure that you can kind of understand that you've thought through what it will mean to be a leader with those values. It's one of the things that I don't know if you share this opinion or not, Aaron, but one of the things that I've certainly feel like I've come into contact a lot with people that are running for office is they've really thought a lot about the campaign, but they often haven't thought a lot about actually what they're going to do once they're in office. And so there are people who, they might win and kind of trip a little bit because they weren't kind of ready to go. Their campaign was kind of built before their idea for how they would govern was built. But if you do it the other way around and you have an idea for how you want to govern, which is specific to the position that you're running for, is it a legislative position? Is it an executive position? Are you part of a party that's in the majority or the minority? Are you not part of a party? Are the people that you're running against going to be friendly to you or oppositional with you? All of those things can make a dramatically different experience being in office. And you might have to have an entirely different strategy, an entirely different ideology if you're coming in part of a majority party, let's say, versus coming in part of a minority party.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, I have a little bit of a different view in the sense that, I do think that most people that I've worked with, you know, have a strong idea of what they want to do in government, or at least think they have an idea of what they will do when they're in government. And I think that the problem is that throughout the course of even if you're that pothole candidate, the one issue, I've got a solution to a very specific problem that the whole community cares about. I'm going to run on that and I'm going to win. Even that candidate has to run through a 6 or an 8 or a 12-month campaign where they're going to be forced to respond and react and develop ideas to a whole host of other issues. And I think that what I see a lot of campaigns doing is having a lot of great ideas, putting a lot of ideas out there into the world, making a lot of promises, and it can be the most disciplined team, the most disciplined candidate, but I think that they're going to run up against a lot of counter currents when they actually get into the
Mm-hmm.
government body
Mm-hmm.
that they are jumping into. And I think that it in a city hall, or a small city legislative body, local municipal legislative body, or in a state house, I think that there's going to be pressures around the priorities of the moment and the legislative agenda of the executive or the party, that are going to prevent that candidate from accomplishing all of the things that they set out to accomplish. And I think that that is a challenge in how our government systems work. And I that's a tough one for me. That's a tough one because I don't necessarily fault well-intentioned candidates that have a very specific idea for not getting a chance to accomplish everything that they talk about in the campaign. I think that though the most successful ones are disciplined, are adaptable, are able to apply their values and their ideas to the priorities, the issue priorities, the legislation of the moment, are able to be adaptable in the sense that they can forge alliances, that they can see opportunities to help people, and they can build alliances and consensus to actually get things done. Um, so maybe I favor a more sort of pragmatic approach to governance, but I do think that there is a kind of a level of flexibility that's necessary that you can't help because that's just a result of how these systems and these government systems and these legislative bodies work.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, for people that are coming into office, is sort of this like proactive versus reactive, mindset once they get there. And I would say that I think that reactive, we've got that down pat. Government knows how to do reactive. Something happens, elected officials get involved because people bring it to their attention, and they put energy towards working on a solution. Whether they ever find one or not almost doesn't even matter, because the purpose really in a lot of those scenarios is to kind of show people that you agree that there's a big issue and you're going to do everything you can to work on it. But a lot of the things that are challenging us are not fires that need to be put out. You think about a firefighter versus a fire prevention officer. We need more people thinking strategically ahead of time. We need more of the fire prevention officers in government.
Yeah.
Because
But the problem, sorry, but just to stop you, the problem is that the candidate that wants to be the fire prevention officer, with all the best ideas of long-term plans to, fix, systemic problems in our systems, uh,
it sounds like it
they're
makes, yeah.
they're going to go in and they're going to run into all of the reactive people in that government body, and they have to they need the cooperation of those people in order to get things done. And so, how do you balance that?
Really delicately, really carefully, lots of trial and error. I don't know, I mean, I know I can certainly say from my own perspective, one of the things that I was looking forward to when I ran in South Orange was that South Orange's mayor, or village president, as it's actually called, although that might have been changed recently, finally. Um, uh,
Wow,
yeah, I know
big
this is
deal.
a multi-decade long issue. And people coming into that position, which was a very strong executive position. I was trying to learn, especially from all the department heads who had way more experience than I did on the
Yeah.
finance side, on the public safety side, or your tax assessor, your purchasing agent, all these different people who had been there for a while, and who, in my eyes, didn't really have the support of the elected officials to do more.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. To some degree, it almost doesn't matter what the form of government is or which branch of government you're in, because if somebody doesn't like you and they're in there and they want to stop you, as I experienced when I was in office, where they're singularly focused on stopping you, which is something that is not unlikely to happen if you're kind of running from the outside. That can really muck up your plans pretty quickly. But what I would say is that being strategic and being proactive is something that can be integrated into governance. It is not easy to do. And part of thinking through what you want to do, for me, it was easier to be proactive and strategic and downplay the reactive side, because let's just say I certainly wasn't planning on running for a second term. Running the first time, I was pretty sure that wasn't going to be happening. And that
Despite my best efforts.
despite you and a few other people's best efforts, I was really yeah. Although that discussion was like 3 years in, which was too late to make that convincing,
I
at
know.
that point. But I went into it really with the certainty that I would be doing a 4-year term, which, as we talked about before, for, our transient millennial generation, a 4-year commitment is a pretty big commitment. That's longer than I've been in any one job since then, for example. And I know a lot of other people in the same boat. That's longer than I've lived, other than the house I grew up in. That's longer than I've lived in one place.
Yep.
And so, so I didn't have the same concern about sort of the random ad hoc feedback from the peanut gallery, because I knew that some of the things that we would be doing, even if they might be unpopular in the moment that we were doing them, 6 months later or a year later, people would see the benefits and they would realize that we had made the right decision. And I think that that rings true in a lot of the work we did in South Orange. So it was easier for me to push off some of that a little bit. But the value that we got from that is really, it's hard to quantify. I mean, I brought our governing body together to have goal setting meetings, which as a consultant, as an administrator in 2 towns for the last 3 years and a consultant working with a number of others, there are very few towns, if any, at that level that actually just bring the elected officials together and just decide on an annual strategic plan. We do this with companies, we do this with nonprofits, we might even do this in our personal lives, but government, I mean, we're passing a budget, at the local level in New Jersey, in May, we're passing the budget for that year. You can't get any less proactive than that. And the whole system is designed that way. So if you want to come into this, like Aaron said, I mean, you're going to get a lot of pushback, as fires come up and as people are demanding your attention on things. But that's why it's even more important to have your own framework ahead of time so that you can identify, and you might even set time in your day. This is proactive time. This is reactive time. This is deep work time. This is emailing time. This is studying issues. This is talking to constituents. You might think of some ways, and you might imagine forward a little bit. Do you feel confident that you can kind of keep moving on your plan without getting distracted every minute? How are you going to balance that? And if you have no idea how you're going to do that, that's something you might want to think about ahead of time, because if you can't imagine a way to do that and you don't think you can do that, for example, you might want to wait a little bit more, build those skills up so that you can be in office and have a more impactful time while you're in office. You can do more things, but that's all part of the kind of balancing and evaluating that everybody has to do in the beginning. So that's just another example of some things that might be worth thinking about, is thinking about your time in office and working your way backwards, or making sure you've at least done that kind of thought experiment. And as you imagine yourself as that leader, I mean, think about yourself, you might be managing staff at that point. You might be responsible directly for other people's jobs. You might be responsible for decisions that are going to impact people's safety, their schools, their environment, their economic security. I mean, you think about what's happening all over the state, all over the country right now, all over the world, in regards to this unbelievably difficult balancing act of how to not crush people economically with shutdowns of businesses, but how to keep people safe by not encouraging people to gather in density. And if you're in government, you're going to have to make those decisions. And you might have to make a decision which you're going to have a terrible decision and a less terrible decision. And are you sort of prepared? Do you feel confident that, given being put in a really difficult situation, you're going to be able to pull the trigger on those sorts of decisions? And if you feel confident about that, that's great. If you don't feel confident, that might be something worth exploring a little bit, because you're going to be put in that position and you want to make sure you're prepared for it.
I have a question. Are we trying to encourage people to run for office here, or discourage them?
I think we're trying to encourage the right people to approach this in the best possible way.
I know. I'm just kidding.
We've got, let's put it this way. I mean, tell me if you agree with this. We've got a lot of people who are running for office and in office who shouldn't be. There are a lot of people who don't run for office who should be.
Yes, I cautiously agree with you there.
That's probably the safest way to agree with me on anything. And so what we're hoping to do here a little bit is try to realign some of that mismatch. And certainly a lot of the work I know that I've done in the last few years has been trying to find ways to bridge that to communities of people who don't typically run for office. Because the same thing over and over again, like I said in the beginning of the series, is not going to get us better results. And so, Aaron, I mean, in the early stages of thinking about this, I know actually one of the other things that's come up that I think we've both encountered is people thinking about like where they're going to live, if they're starting a family, their job, things like that. Is there anything kind of on those topics for people that might be trying to think through all those disparate pieces that you want to throw out here at this point?
Well, I mean, I think that the job, how do I earn a living while I run for office, and while I get more involved in government? That's another, important question that I think affects our generation in unique ways. I think that if you have figured out the community that you want to settle into and begin to lay down those roots and get more involved in and start the kind of the pre-planning phase of getting more involved and exploring whether or not you're going to run. I think you also have to think about what am I what does the rest of my life look like while I'm doing that, right? And you presumably have a job and are earning a living so that you can sustain your life, like most people. And so one of the challenges that I've seen a lot of people have is balancing that job and that potentially family life, family obligations, other types of obligations in your life, with the high demand, and time consuming process of preparing to run for office and then running for office and then being in government. And remember, campaigns, you know it's not best practices to pay yourself a salary as a candidate, in most instances. And many local elected positions, as was the case with yours, don't pay a salary, or pay a reduced salary that is not competitive, and is not going to allow you to sustain your life in that present form. And then layer on top of this, people who are doing this who have families, right? Who have kids, to pay for and to have to nurture and spend time with. So I think that thinking about how you're going to put those ducks in a row. Do you have a partner who's helping you? Do you have family who's helping you? Are you, you know, do you have a job that affords you some of the, liberties, time liberties, to spend on this stuff? And then there's also kind of the whole element of your job may not want you to run for office. Your job may prevent you from being a public figure. Many people who want to run for office that I know, don't, because they're already involved in politics in a professional capacity. They're already involved in government in a professional capacity. Their clients are, have public affairs needs. And so running for office, you know, means potential conflicts of interest. So, I think that there are those types of challenges that really, require a lot of careful consideration, before you jump in. Because the last thing you want to do is start running for office, start a campaign, start fundraising, and realize, 6 months down the stretch that it's too hard to balance it all. And your job is suffering because of it, or your campaign is suffering because you're spending too much time on your job. Um, or your boss comes to you and says, hey, I saw this article on social media about you, and you were out there saying this about our buildings department, and we occupy a building downtown, or I don't know. But I think that there's all those kinds of conflicts of interest, that again, could trip you up. So that's a challenge worth spending some time on.
It is. I agree. It's so important that you're setting yourself up for success in what you're doing here. And if you haven't thought through these things, you may get a surprise that could have been something that wasn't a surprise. And so, really thinking this out and thinking about what you're going to do during your term of office, thinking about what you're going to do during your campaign, understanding that we live in this unbelievably backwards incentive political system that pays elected officials nothing in most local offices, like Aaron mentioned. So, okay, so who do we want to be in these offices? People who have money already and have plenty of time on their hands? Are you supposed to be able to run? If you're supposed to be able to be a mayor in a town that doesn't pay you, if you're a single parent, or if you're taking care of a family member, or if you work one or two jobs, I mean, it's impossible. And so many people are taken out of the process before they can even get started. Even in New Jersey, our state legislators are paid $50,000 a year, which is not an incredible salary considering how expensive New Jersey is to live in. And so all of those people, many of them, have other full-time jobs, and we systemically create this conflict of interest, which is at the root of so much waste and inefficiency and corruption in government. So much of that is built on people who get into a position where their livelihood is intertwined with their government public position in a way that it never should have been. And if you can think about that ahead of time, if you have kids and you need to make sure you've got a savings account, maybe your partner works, maybe they don't, maybe you don't have a partner, maybe there's so many different ways to think about it. Think about how your family is going to be impacted. If you're running for school board on contentious issues and you have a kid in the schools, that's great because you're going to learn a little bit about it. But think about what that experience might be like from the kid's perspective. Are they going to have any impacts from you being on the campaign or from you being on the governing body for the school? And just make sure you think about all those things through, and make sure you're taking care of yourself. I mean, that's something they always taught us, on the rescue squad at EMT school is you can't take care of anybody else if you're hurt. And so you have to take care of yourself first. And that's not selfish to do. It's not anything bad. If you are not whole, if you are not healthy, financially stable, comfortable, and safe, you're not going to be able to do the things on the campaign and in office that you're going to want to do. You're not going to have the independence that people really should have in those positions. And so, Aaron, before I recap just a couple of things that we've covered here so far, is there anything that you wanted to add in this kind of first early section about thinking through the process of running for office?
Well, I mean, I think that, sort of hand in hand with the notion of, how are you going to sustain the rest of your life while you're doing this very intense thing is, your support network is
Mm-hmm.
who's gonna help you run for office. And I think that if you don't have a good support network, you're probably not going to be successful. And support network is not just, you know people, friends that have campaign experience or that have communications experience, or that know the ins and outs of the local government, that may be in the local government. It's also, who are you going to be able to lean on when things are very stressful? Do you have someone in your life who's able to sort of pick up the slack? And I think thinking about that team that you're going to surround yourself with. I think that we can probably get into this later, but there are a lot of different roles that you will require to fill within that team. And so I think starting to think about that early, and making sure that you have that in place is important as well.
That's so important. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I mean, I think this is something I took for granted a little bit. I mean, you're 23, the support is the energy every day that you've got, but like that, even itself, I mean, it is just, it is a really difficult process. And making sure you've got people who not only can support you, but can be honest with you is really important. And it's important to make sure that you're availing yourself of whatever you need to do to make sure that you are in tip top shape from a mental health standpoint. This is sort of something that's becoming less and less of a taboo, in our culture and society. But there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's nothing wrong. It is an incredibly proactive and smart thing to do if you're thinking about running for office, to have if you have a health plan that allows you to see a mental health expert on a regular basis. You should avail yourself of those opportunities if you have them. Everybody should have those opportunities, but if you do, there is nothing wrong with taking advantage of those things. It will be tremendously valuable for you. And one last thing I might say too that that maybe I should have mentioned before is when you're thinking about people that are thinking about running, there are so many different blocks that are out there that sort of stop people from thinking about it farther. And one of them that we hadn't touched on really yet is, or maybe we did for a moment, is the amount of time that you spend in the political world. A lot of young people that I've talked to, they don't want to be a career politician, and that label has become, probably for good reasons, but either way, it's got a lot of negative connotations among our generation and younger. And people don't want to be a career politician, and I don't blame them. And one of the things it's worth thinking about is most of us have this sort of default idea that longevity equals power in government. We see people who are in office for long periods of time and keep running for higher offices. And there were a lot of rules in Congress and other legislative bodies that actually did incentivize that. And you kind of had to bide your time and play the game. And then you'd get rewarded with a good committee chairmanship later on. But that's not the only model. That is one way to get involved in this. That is one model, one format. There are many others, and the power from being in office is really more of a bell curve. Being in office for a long period of time might get you a lot of power because you have experience and connections and seniority in certain places. But being in office for a very short period of time is also very powerful because you don't have to play as much of the political bullshit game that most people do have to play. You can be more independent. You can make longer term strategic decisions. And sometimes the decisions that we need to be made are not the most popular ones. And plenty of examples throughout history where we wouldn't have moved forward, especially on civil rights and social issues, had we just put it up to a vote. And so there is this bell curve in thinking about this. And one of the things that I've heard has been helpful for people thinking about this is to think about running for office not as a career or a job, but as a term of service. And if we think about other service opportunities like the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or Teach for America or the military, running for office is actually very similar in many ways, right? It is an experience that is it is for a finite amount of time. And during that period of time, you are going to get paid very little, if anything, and it is going to be extremely stressful, difficult, potentially dangerous, risky. But during that experience, you will be able to have a significant impact on those around you, and you will be able to learn things that once this service term is over, will be able to help accelerate you economically in other ways. You will have gained knowledge, insight, networks, experience that will allow you to start your own company, that will allow you to be a consultant, that will allow you to teach, that will allow you to write a book, that allow you to do all these other things that could be done. Then you gain that experience while you are in office. And so for those of you who think about running for office and you see the campaign and the getting ready for the campaign in this 3 to 5 to 7 years or more of this whole thing, and you really see a question mark at the end of that, don't worry. You don't have to once you get in, you don't have to do it for the rest of your life. That is just only the way that certain people go about it. You can create a different model, and thinking about it as a term of service might be a way to help keep in mind that this is a finite period of time that will be difficult, but it will be good for others and it will be good for you in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said, and I think I agree with all of it. I think that the only thing that I would sort of add or, maybe clarify is that some people are on an upward trajectory, right? Some people run for local office and then they run for, state office and then they run for Congress. And I do think that there is a place for doing that in a way that aligns with a lot of the values that we've been talking about. And I do think that there is a positive career track that the preceding offices do give you experience and help. And I would actually prefer to see more people running for Congress that have like local government experience than not. So that's just one little clarification, but otherwise like totally on the same page.
And I appreciate that clarification. I should summarize by saying something like that there are different tracks that you can do here. The default one isn't the only one. Each of them have pros and cons, and you should think through which one works for you and not just do what everybody else has done. Is that fair?
Yes, that is totally fair.
Awesome. All right, so we've covered a couple things so far. We've talked a little bit about kind of thinking about this timeline, getting involved in your community ahead of time, finding the right way to plug in, not so that you can check a box, but so that you can actually learn what's happening in your community, learn about what skills you might be bringing to the table, and find sort of the highest value add way that you might be able to get involved, which is going to potentially, if an authentic, engaging experience, help prepare you for running and for being in office so that you can be more connected to the issues in your community. We've talked a little bit about thinking through your own plans, your own life, making sure that you've thought through not just what running the campaign is going to look like, but what being in office is going to look like, and that you're fully committing to the whole experience and that you feel comfortable, safe, secure with yourself, if you have a family, if you live in the community, if you own a home in the community, if you have kids in the schools, thinking through all those different details and just making sure you're not leaving anything out that's going to really kick you later on down the line. We talked a little bit about making sure that when you're running, that you're not doing it just because you want to do it, but you're doing it because you've identified needs in your community and that you are the right person or the best person or a better person to be able to plug into those needs. And that it's not just kind of about you. And we talked a little bit about some of the values that might be worth thinking about when you try to imagine yourself as a leader. This is both as the official if and when you win, and as the candidate, which, as we'll talk about in some of our later episodes here, is its own entire kind of management experience, being part of this team that you have to oversee and that you have to ultimately lead. And so we want to think about authenticity and that we're not doing things because they look like they're the right things to do, but we're doing them because we've genuinely learned that they are the right things to do. Talked a little bit about surrounding yourself with a support network and making sure that that group of people, some of whom might be kind of close by, some of whom might be far away, and that those people can not just support you, but be honest with you and help keep you honest. And we talked a little bit about some of the importance of being ready to really do the work, and that this is not the easy way to make change. I don't know what is. I'd certainly love to hear about that if there is one. But this is a valuable way. It is an impactful way. And it is going to be difficult and challenging and grueling and time consuming and all of those things. But if you're willing to really prepare yourself and engage in a really thorough way, there is unbelievable opportunity for making your community a better place, for learning skills that you can take elsewhere. And so we hope that some of these different things have been helpful in just the very first part. For those of you who think maybe running for office might be right for me, but I'm not really sure what to do next, hope some of this discussion has proven valuable. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the very early stages of putting together a campaign. And certainly, if you have any questions from anything that we've talked about, if you want to hear more about it, I know we're happy to share resources, ideas, and guidance about how to best wrap your head around, is this the right thing to do, and should you run for office? So I just want to thank Aaron again for joining me. And hopefully we'll be talking to everybody who's watching this soon on some of our next episodes.